What is the strangest thing you've seen that you still cannot explain? This happened in Girl Scouts, and my best friends were in it. It was a way to hang out with them in the woods, camp, go to theme parks, take trips and all that, and selling cookies made it free for us to do everything. We were in Florida, at a camp called J.B. Starkey, working on earning a kayaking badge. There were other badges planned too, but I can't remember which ones. We didn't stay in cabins, so looking at images online might not help much. We set up tents on small plots right by the water, so we'd be close for kayaking. It was the second day, just after dusk had settled. It was fully nighttime. The campground was hosting a constellation viewing event with a couple of telescopes set up so we could see the stars. My leader was excited. This viewing could help us earn another badge. She had everything planned and announced that we were going to the event. Too much information coming up. I got my period the day before. I was not expecting it, but I had tampons and other supplies, so it was fine. We were told we would be going to the constellation viewing and to be ready in 10 minutes, which meant putting on bug spray, zipping up our tents, and putting the food in her car. I decided this would be a good time to change, since I would be out in a field for 2 hours. I told my friends what I was doing and made my way to the bathroom house. We were supposed to have bathroom buddies bring one other person with you, but we were teenagers who did whatever we wanted. If one of us had to go, we'd just go. My leader didn't really mind because we were old enough to use the bathroom on our own. It was Girl Scout policy to have a bathroom buddy and never travel alone, but rebellious teenagers and shy bathroom habits didn't always follow that. The area was open. There weren't sealed walls or doors. It was designed that way to let air flow through and the shower water drain out. The stalls were still locked, of course, but all the walls were lifted off the ground with about an 8-inch gap between the walls and the floor. You could look under a stall without bending over and see people's feet and calves. I did my thing. This is important. I wrapped the old tamp in toilet paper and put it in the trash. I also put the plastic applicator inside the wrapper and threw it away. Each stall had a tiny trash bin, and those 2 items were the only things in it. I washed my hands and went back to the tents, only to find that everyone had left. No one was sitting in their chairs around the fire pit. My friends weren't in their tents or in the cars anywhere. I didn't have a phone, bad kid. My mom said no phone for me until high school, so I had no idea what time it was. Why would they have left me? I had only been in there for what felt like 5 minutes. I still had 5 extra minutes. They shouldn't have left me, or at least should have told me they were ready to go. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to get to the field for the constellation viewing, so I sat in one of the campfire chairs. I fiddled with something for a few minutes before a parent and my leader came back and saw me. They looked relieved, and the girls trailing behind them looked both relieved and worried. They asked where I had been, and I said I was in the bathroom, like I had told 3 of the girls before I went. They said no, I hadn't been, because after 10 minutes the 3 girls had come to get me, and I wasn't there. They had all looked for me. I wasn't in the bathroom house, and all the stalls were open, so it wasn't a case of just missing me. I told them I had only been in there for 5 minutes, and no one had come in. I had just come out a few minutes ago. Then my leader said, "You've been missing for an hour." I didn't even know how to react, until I noticed how dark it was. It had still been light outside when I went in, because it was dusk, and now it was fully nighttime. All the girls had their flashlights out. I kept saying no, I had only been in there for 5 minutes, but no one believed me. The parent thought I had gone off with some boys who had been talking to me earlier at the lake. I know that's what my leader believed too, and probably the other girls as well. No one believed me, and understandably so. It was pretty unbelievable. We went to the constellation viewing, but we only had an hour because they had spent half the time looking for me. When we got back, my 3 friends went to the bathroom. I didn't know how this was supposed to prove. I had only been in the bathroom for 5 minutes, but my brain insisted, show them the trash. Why? I don't know. Looking back now, I have no clue how that was supposed to help my story. I could have just used the bathroom and gone over to the boys afterward, but I told them anyway. Once we got there, I went into the stall and said, "See, look, I was in here," pointing at the trash bin, but it was empty. What the heck? I knew I had thrown that stuff away in there. I checked the other stall's trash bins. They had a few paper towels and other trash, but they weren't empty. Why was mine empty? Why would someone take specifically my used things out of the trash? I shouldn't have brought it up at all, because it only made them believe me even less. That was the one part I couldn't figure out. I can rationalize most of it in my head. Maybe I just dissociated because I was tired from kayaking, and maybe they simply didn't see me while looking. But I can't explain what happened to the trash. I thought I was going crazy. Story 2. I was dating a girl eons ago, and one night she left my house after hanging out to go home. About 10 minutes later, she called because she had curbed her car while trying not to hit a dog that looked like a ghost. I was annoyed, thought she was exaggerating, helped her unlock her steering wheel, and she was on her way. Years later, I was riding with a completely separate and unrelated girlfriend. I was looking down at some CDs in my lap, trying to figure out what to play next. Out of the blue, she yelled, "Crap," and slammed on the brakes, and we slid to a stop. I asked, "What the heck are you doing?" She said, "Did you not see that dog run right in front of us? It looked like a ghost wolf." I looked around, and sure enough, we were right near the same spot where my previous girlfriend had seen that ghostly dog or whatever it was. Once that clicked, it completely freaked me out. So while I technically never saw it myself, the strange, almost ethereal canine scared two different girlfriends of mine, and none of us has any idea what it actually was. Story 3. There were 2 incidents, both weird as hell. Part 1. Savannah Hotel Stairs. Many years ago, I was on vacation with my family in Savannah, Georgia. On the way back to our hotel from dinner, I decided to take the stairs instead of the elevator. The hotel was very old, and elevators always made me uneasy. My mother and sibling took the elevator up to our room on the 3rd or 4th floor, while my dad and I took the stairs. The stairs were designed so that you would walk up a set, reach a landing, and then the stairs would double back to the next floor. As we climbed the last set before our floor, I walked ahead of my dad and reached the landing while he was still on the floor below. I stood in the middle of the landing, and then a man came down the stairs from the floor above. I stepped back to avoid blocking his way. He was wearing a long gray coat and a hat. I didn't get a clear look at him because I was looking down the stairs at my dad, but I stepped aside and said, "Excuse me," as he passed. He walked behind me and then around me once he reached the landing. At that moment, my dad, who was looking up at me, made a funny face and asked who I was talking to. That instant gave me that stomach drop, scared feeling, and when I spun around, the man was gone. I didn't have much time to react before I saw my dad, who was walking up the stairs to the landing, turn toward an empty part of the stairs and nod like you would to someone on the street. I immediately asked who he was nodding to, and he looked down the stairs below him. Then he turned back and said, "Did you just see that too?" In that instant, we both understood we had seen the same thing. Needless to say, we sprinted the rest of the way up to our hotel room. This was one of those times when I would have been perfectly fine taking the elevator. I have no idea what that was. I'm not usually into the whole paranormal thing, but the fact that my dad confirmed he saw the same figure walk past him and that we both saw no one there just leaves me completely unsure. Now for the second weird thing. Part 2. Dream about Air Algeria. Flight 5017. Back in 2014, I had a dream that has always stayed with me. Normally, I have several dreams each night that flow into one another but still feel distinctly separate. My dreams are always in first person, though they usually have that fuzzy, unreal quality to them. But that night was different. I was dreaming as usual when, all of a sudden, I woke up. It didn't feel like a normal awakening. There was no hazy transition, no slow awareness creeping in. One moment I was dreaming, and the next I was there, fully conscious and alert. Everything felt sharp and immediate. That's when I realized something was wrong. I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I found myself on top of a massive plateau in the middle of a desert, overlooking miles and miles of sand. I was standing right near the cliff's edge, and it had to be a few thousand feet down. It was nighttime, and a violent storm raged above me. I could tell I must have still been dreaming or something, but it didn't feel like a dream. It's hard to explain, but my awareness was exactly the same as it is right now as I'm writing this. Maybe that's what people mean when they talk about lucid dreaming, but if so, that's terrifying. I had complete control over myself, full sensation in my body, and could touch and feel everything like normal. It was indistinguishable from real life, and I think that's what made it so frightening. All of a sudden, I was hit with a feeling that something was deeply wrong. It was that cold rush you get when you're terrified or something traumatic happens, but amplified tenfold. I just knew that something terrible was about to happen, and instinctively, I looked up. High above, through the storm, I saw a passenger plane cutting across the sky. Moments later, lightning struck it. The plane exploded and caught fire, breaking apart in midair as flaming debris rained down all around me. At some point, I realized I was no longer standing on the plateau. I was on the ground near it, though I hadn't felt myself move. I could see the plateau towering in the distance, which meant I must have changed locations without even noticing. I sat for what felt like hours in the desert, surrounded by the burning wreckage of the plane in complete silence. Eventually, people arrived, investigators or military personnel maybe, and I helped them search through the debris, taking photos and assisting however I could. No one seemed to notice that I wasn't supposed to be there. By then, the flames had died out, though a few pieces still smoldered. The area was nothing but scorched earth and twisted metal. I remember standing there, staring at a piece of landing gear, when suddenly I was back in my bed, lying on my back and staring at the ceiling. At this point, I had woken up, but I was immediately suspicious. I'd never experienced any kind of waking up transition before. It was another sharp, sudden shift. 1 second, I was standing in the desert, and the next, I was in my bed, just like when I'd first found myself on the plateau. It felt almost like teleportation, though I don't think that's what it was. There was no change in my awareness, no gradual realization that I had just woken up. My level of consciousness stayed exactly the same. After a while, I went downstairs where my dad was working on his computer. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about that dream was too strange, too real to dismiss. I told him I thought something bad had happened and asked him to check the news. Honestly, I think I just wanted someone else to validate what I'd experienced, to confirm what I already knew deep down. He went to the NBC News website, and the front page headline read, Algeria Flight AH501 vanishes over Western Africa. Earlier that morning, Air Algeria Flight 5017 had crashed in the desert in Mali during severe weather. All 116 people on board had died. He asked how I'd heard about it, and I explained everything I just told him. Even the timeline of the crash matched up with when I'd been asleep. The crash of Air Algeria 5017 didn't receive much media attention, coming so soon after other aviation disasters. Earlier that same week, MH17 had been shot down over Ukraine, and another plane had crashed in Taiwan. I followed the Air Algeria story closely, and when photos of the wreckage were released, it looked eerily similar to what I had seen in my dream. I don't think I'll ever forget that dream. I've never had anything even close to as lifelike since, but sometimes I still catch myself wondering if I can ever be completely sure I'm not dreaming, because that one felt exactly like this, like real life. The sense of pure wrongness I felt that night is something I've never experienced again. I still think about all the people on that plane and their families. It's unsettling, to say the least. Story 4. When I was in my 20s, in the early 1990s, I was in a car accident that kept me in the hospital for about a year. It was a Catholic hospital, and most of the nursing staff were nuns. In addition to their regular rounds, they often stopped by just to chat and see how I was doing. Early one morning, there was a knock at the door, and a nun I hadn't seen before came in. She introduced herself as Sister Greta, a member of the nursing staff. She sat on the edge of my bed, and we talked for a few minutes before she asked if she could say a prayer for me. She held my hand, said a gentle prayer, then wished me well and left. About 5 minutes later, there was another knock, and one of the regular sisters came in to say hello. I mentioned that it was shaping up to be a good day. I'd already had one visit from Sister Greta, and now I was getting another. She paused and said there wasn't a Sister Greta on the staff, explaining that only 2 sisters were on duty that early in the morning. I pointed to the bed, where the sheets were still creased from where she had sat, and described her and the habit she'd been wearing. Starting to feel uneasy, the sister just shrugged and went about her rounds. She came back about half an hour later with a book about the hospital's history and showed me a photo of several nuns from the 1950s. Their habits matched exactly what I had described. Apparently, patients had often mentioned speaking with nuns in the old-style uniforms, nuns who definitely weren't part of the current staff. I never saw her again or anything like that for the rest of my stay. It was kind of freaky, but not really disturbing. I can't explain it, but I suppose it's the kind of ghost story I'm okay with, if that's what it was. Edit. Okay, lots of cool questions that I'll reply to, but a couple of common ones first. No, I'm not religious by any stretch. I believe in a good night's sleep, a juicy steak, and the love of a good woman, or man, or whoever lights your candle. I made some belief decisions in my mid-teens and have stuck to them ever since. Nope. Not once did anyone try to save or convert me. In fact, my father marked the religion question as NA on the admission forms, and neither of us was ever questioned about it. If a prayer was ever offered, I was asked first if it was okay, and a few times I declined. Trust me, when you've been assisted with, well, the less glamorous parts of life while lying on your back in traction, and endured the cleanup afterward, it takes a while before you're eager for company again. The first few weeks I was on meds. If I remember correctly, the sisters all lived on the top floor of the hospital. So technically, yes, there was someone living in the attic. Could the nuns have been pranking me? Absolutely. Despite popular perception, they're a funny bunch. Love a good laugh, read comics, and watch Star Wars. Only thing is, there was never a "ha, got you" afterward. Yup, it absolutely could have been a hallucination if you ignore the bum imprint on the bed. Yup, it absolutely could have been sleep paralysis. And yup, I absolutely could have dreamed the whole thing. But OP asked for strange stuff that happened that I couldn't explain. No, I don't think she was Cthulhu or one of his followers, but hey, I've been wrong about that kind of thing before. Edit. A few more things. I'm originally from Zimbabwe, and this all happened there. The hospital was called Mater Dei, and no, I haven't found any record of a Sister Greta working there. The quick summary. I was asleep in the back of a pickup on the way back from a rugby tournament when we had a head-on collision with a drunk driver. I went through the back of the cab, shattered the windscreen, hit the other car, and ended up in the bush a few meters away. I suffered multiple internal injuries, including a lacerated liver, kidney damage, and a collapsed lung. I also broke several bones, ribs, jaw, collarbone, hip, and 3 crushed vertebrae, T12, L1, and L2. The spinal cord was intact but compressed, which explained the lack of feeling and movement from my mid-torso down. The surgeries involved wiring my jaw, decompressing and removing bone fragments from my spinal column and fusing the damaged vertebrae. I'm now 2 inches shorter than I was, with a curve in my back that Quasimodo would be proud of. Despite all that, I was the lucky one, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Being in Zimbabwe, insurance and medical aid were hardly helpful. My dad covered most of the bills by emptying his savings and taking out a loan, and the rugby community pitched in as well. The hospital trust waived a good portion of the costs, too. It was brutal financially, but I've managed to pay it all back or pay it forward. I still don't quite get the nun plays a wild prank to raise money theory, but okay. No one ever asked for money beyond the bills, which we were allowed to pay over literal years. I also don't really get the whole nun plays a wild prank to convert souls idea. Some morphine in my drip and a tart in a robe with a halo would have worked way better, and that's just off the top of my head. There was no attempt to save my soul, none. One last thing. Being a nurse or any medical professional is a nasty, hard, selfless, and largely thankless job from what I saw, and yet that's exactly what they did. They cleaned up my messes. They helped me vomit. They sat with me while I cried my heart out for my friends and my own future. They patiently tolerated me when I got ranty and ravey. They found my blood when I needed it because I have a tricky blood type, and at no point did they tell me to pray, look to God, count my blessings, or thank the saints. They asked their God to help, and then let me lean on them. Anyone calling crap good on ya? I wouldn't believe it either, and that's cool. Opinion is a wonderful thing. And for those of you concerned that I might have some inside knowledge of Cthulhu, relax. I don't. I just accidentally vacationed in Arlie 1 year, and let's just say the brochures didn't quite match the experience. Story 5. I've got a story, a really good one. I still can't explain it even now. We didn't get hurt, thankfully, but it scared the absolute crap out of both of us. Honestly, I still wonder if we got probed by aliens. So here's the context. I live in a small town by the ocean. There's only one road in and out. About 40 to 50 minutes away is the nearest city, still a small one. And in between are a few other little communities like mine. But mine is literally the end of the road. Go any farther and you'll be swimming. The closest community to mine is about a 25-minute drive away. Between my town and theirs is a long, winding road, with one very long straight section known as the Stretch, flanked by thick forest on both sides. The mountains and ocean are a bit farther out, but the road mostly runs right along the coastline. In many places, you could practically toss a rock from the road into the water. There are a few scattered houses, each with 1 or 2 streetlights, but beyond that, it's completely dark. From my town all the way to about 10 minutes outside the city, it's moose territory. This story takes place roughly 15 minutes from my home, at a dirt parking lot for a hiking trail. It's right off the road, maybe 20 seconds away from the pavement. Anyway, to the story. My girlfriend and I were at this parking lot in the literal middle of nowhere around 10 p.m. It was long past dark. Our car had a crappy battery and we had it turned off. Long story short, when we tried to start it again, it wouldn't. Of all the times for the battery to die, it had to be now, in a creepy, pitch-black parking lot in the woods. After we got over the initial fright, we tried the car a few more times. We grabbed our essentials, bags, keys, a bit of water, and started figuring out our options. We were about halfway to the nearest town where we could use someone's phone or we could walk the other way to her dad's house, one of those scattered houses along the road to the city. In either direction, it was still at least 15 minutes away by car, maybe more. We decided to walk toward our town because, first, it seemed a bit closer. Second, to reach her dad's house, we would have had to walk along the stretch, and there was no way we were doing that. Third, we figured her parents would have noticed she wasn't home. She's a type 1 diabetic, and on a strict schedule, she had to be home by 11, so they'd likely be driving the road looking for her. So we started walking toward town. It was too dark to make out much besides the general direction we were heading. Oddly, you could see better without a flashlight. Using one would have blinded us to everything outside its beam, which was dangerous. Apart from the occasional rustle in the forest beside us, nothing much happened at first. Our main fear was seeing a moose. If we did, that would have ended everything right there. However, something soon happened. About halfway between where we started and the town, we reached a section of road where there's a cliff on the left side, the side we were walking on. It spans roughly 40 meters, give or take 10, and it rises up into the mountain rather than dropping down toward the ocean. The ocean was just to our right, beyond a steep drop and a sharp tree-covered hill. There was a rock barrier along the road, meant to stop pebbles and the occasional large rock from sliding down onto the pavement. On either side of the barrier, the slopes were steep and covered with semi-loose gravel and rocks. As we started walking alongside the cliff, we heard a few small pebbles quietly skitter down, tapping against the rock cages before settling. Then it went still again. We thought, "Oh, that was cool," and kept walking, both of us looking up at the cliff face. That's when it happened, a sudden flash of vivid blue light. It lit up the entire cliffside for a split second, painting everything in an eerie electric glow. We could see every jagged detail, even the sharp overhang above the cages, as the light streaked through the sky and vanished just as fast as it came. I had my DSLR in my bag, and my girlfriend standing beside me, still staring upward, thought it was me taking a picture. I thought it was her snapping one with her iPhone. It even made a soft click that sounded exactly like a camera shutter. But when we both realized neither of us had done it, the air around us suddenly felt colder. The flash lit up the entire cliffside and darted through the sky, starting just beyond our line of sight and disappearing behind the mountain. It didn't come from behind us, it appeared above the cliff and streaked back, all within the blink of an eye. After the flash, the rocks began sliding down again, quiet and small at first, just like before, but over the next 15 to 20 seconds, they grew bigger and louder, eventually slamming against the rock cages with full-on bangs. We bolted to the other side of the road and didn't stop running until we were safely past the cliff. Even then, we could still hear rocks slamming against the cages until it finally stopped, about 10 seconds after we'd put some distance between ourselves and it. At first, there were just small pebbles sliding quietly, then an inexplicable flash of light, followed by large rocks crashing down. And just like that, it all ceased as soon as we were away. It was, without a doubt, the creepiest thing either of us had ever experienced. We talked about it for a few minutes, then decided to leave it until morning before we scared ourselves to death. The rest of the walk was long, dark, and unsettling. We didn't make it home until around midnight, when we finally called my mother after reaching the town. The next morning, we drove back. There were rocks everywhere, some as big as our bodies, others just pebbles, scattered along the roadside and piled over the rock cages, exactly where we'd been walking. If we hadn't run to the other side when we did, those larger rocks would have hit us and likely killed us. Story 6. I have only told this story a handful of times in person and never posted it online. It is one of those stories that when you read it, you would swear I am either 1, insane, 2, a liar, or 3, both. What I am about to write is the honest-to-God truth of what happened and what I saw. I am originally from Wisconsin, but moved in and out a few times during my early years. The last time I returned was in 1997. At the beginning of my 8th grade year, we lived in a small town called Caroline, Wisconsin. Check it out on Google Maps. Not much there. I lived north of the town on a small dairy farm, mostly surrounded by fields. At the back of the fields, there was a fairly sizable wooded area with a 2 or 3 acre pond. From the back of my house, the fields stretched about a quarter of a mile until they reached the woods and pond. My sister and I, if I was 13 or 14, she would have been 11 or 12 at the time, would often walk through the fields into the woods to play around the pond. It was not unusual for us to find dead animals or carrion back there. Sometimes black bears would find a deer and drag it to the pond to eat. We also had feral dogs, not hogs, that would kill calves, deer, or other small animals near the pond. I usually went out with a little .22 LR just in case, though in retrospect it would not have done much. It never bothered me or my sister, and we always just chalked it up to nature doing what nature does. I remember one day going out by myself and seeing a dead deer near the pond. Again, not unusual at all. What caught my eye was that it was a full-grown buck in decent shape. Naturally, I assumed a bear had done it over the past few days and went about my business. Now that you have a little background, I can explain how the beast comes into play. The beast made itself known to me the following summer, between my 8th and 9th grade years, that is, the summer of 1998. The house I lived in was a 2-story farmhouse without central air conditioning. I lived on the 2nd floor, with a single window facing the back. Our backyard was not separated from the fields by a fence or anything. It simply transitioned from regular grass to hay or corn depending on the side of the lawn. The 2 fields did have a barbed wire fence running all the way down to the woods I described earlier. From my window, the area of the woods with the pond was on the left side of the fence, while my house was on the right. My mother tended a fairly large garden in the backyard. On the side of the house where my room was, I would estimate it was about 25 feet by 50 feet. I have no idea exactly what time of night these events took place, but I would guess it was around 11 o'clock or so. As I mentioned, the house did not have air conditioning, so naturally the window in my room was open. My bed sat just to the right of that window, with the headboard against the back wall of the house, the wall that faced the fields. I woke up in bed to complete silence, except for a sound outside my window that could best be described as a grunting or rooting noise. The closest comparison would be a pig pushing its snout into the dirt and grunting. Every so often, the rooting sound was broken by a deep sneezing or hissing noise, the kind of sharp exhale a horse makes through its nose, if that makes sense. It was an odd combination of sounds. I lay there quietly, listening. After a few moments, I realized that whatever was making the noise was 1, in the backyard, and 2, moving around not far from my window. I felt an extreme tightness in my chest. It was hard to breathe. It was as if something heavy was sitting on me, and I was screaming on the inside. I kept telling myself it was just a pig, nothing more. But my farm didn't have pigs. None of the nearby farms did either. They had beef, dairy, or poultry. At that time in Wisconsin, there was no feral hog problem like there is in the South. A pig just didn't make any sense. I slowly pulled the blanket off and set both feet on the floor. Standing up, I turned to look out the window. What I saw still gives me chills to this day. I'm getting goosebumps even typing this now. The moon was out in full force, casting a pale silver sheen across the backyard and fields, stretching all the way to the edge of the woods, where the light faded into complete darkness. I looked down at the garden, and there it was. No joke. My first thought was that it looked like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. A large, stooped figure crouched at the edge of the lawn and garden. I could see it digging along the garden's perimeter. After a moment or two, maybe 30 seconds, it did this odd sideways hop, while still hunched over, then continued digging. It was clearly balancing on its back legs and using its forearms to tear into the ground. When I first saw it, its back was to me. It was along the long side of the garden, facing the field and woods, with its back toward the house and me staring down in absolute terror from about 20 feet above. I watched it shuffle around for a moment, and I remember whispering, "Oh my God." I thought I had said it silently, but I hadn't. The moment the words left my mouth, the creature froze completely. It didn't turn around, didn't make a sound, it just stopped. For 15 to 20 seconds, it remained perfectly still. I was paralyzed at the window, too afraid to move or breathe, terrified that any noise might draw its attention. As it crouched there, I judged the hunched figure to be maybe 4 or 5 feet tall. I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. The shape of its body didn't register as anything familiar. After those long, silent seconds of pure fear, the beast began to move again. When it finally stopped digging, I saw the creature in its full form. It slowly rose onto its 2 hind legs, which I remember clearly, canine in shape, bent in a strong L. As it straightened, it arched its back like someone stretching after sitting too long. That's when it hit me. This thing had to be at least 6, maybe 7 feet tall. It stood there in my backyard for about 5 seconds, facing the field. Then, all at once, it took off running. It sprinted across the field on its hind legs for maybe 100 feet before dropping down to all fours, moving like a dog. It covered several hundred more feet before I saw its silhouette leap over the fence dividing the 2 fields. Then it continued toward the pond. I didn't move from the window for at least 15 minutes. I just stood there, frozen, trying to comprehend what I had seen. I slowly lay back down in bed, my breathing quick and shallow. I stayed awake for hours, terrified that I'd hear those sounds again or see that creature outside my window. But eventually, exhaustion won, and I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke to the smell of breakfast and the sound of my mom in the kitchen, my dad watching the morning news. I jumped out of bed and ran straight outside. Just as I had seen the night before, the entire perimeter of the garden was torn up. I couldn't tell if anything had grown enough to be eaten, but there were mounds of dirt and holes everywhere. I ran back inside, trying to tell my mom and dad that I'd seen a werewolf in the garden. My mom looked out the back window and confirmed that the garden had indeed been dug up. My dad went outside to take a look, and when he came back in, he brushed it off, said it was probably a bear digging around. I lived in that house for another 18 months, but I never went back to the pond or the woods again. Over time, I started to believe that the dead deer and calves I'd found back there weren't from bears, dogs, or coyotes, but from the beast I'd seen that night. Eventually, we moved to a different area, not far away, Tilda, Wisconsin, and I never spoke about what I saw, not once. I didn't bring it up again until years later, after I was married. My wife wanted to see the movie Underworld, and I agreed. I didn't realize it was a werewolf movie, at least not until it was too late. We were in the theater when that same terrified feeling from years earlier came rushing back. I didn't say anything to my wife, at least, not then. A few years later, she wanted to see Underworld 2 in theaters. I figured I could muscle through it for her sake, but then came that one scene. The one with their so-called ultimate werewolf or whatever it was. If you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The moment I saw it, I had a full-blown panic attack. I couldn't breathe. My whole body started shaking and convulsing. It must have looked like I was having a seizure right there in the theater. My wife was terrified and we had to leave immediately. When we got home, I finally told her the story. The same one I've just finished typing here. She told me I should look it up, maybe do some research on it. I said I would, but it was probably another year before I actually did. When I finally searched Wisconsin werewolf on Google, holy crap, there it was. The Beast of Bray Road. That thing had a name. I started reading story after story from people who had encountered it, some going back decades, and I'm telling you folks, there's a lot of consistency. Many of the physical descriptions matched exactly what I saw in my backyard that night. For anyone reading this who lives in Wisconsin, pray you never see this thing. It will haunt your dreams. Story 7. This happened several years ago in college, and to this day, I still can't fully explain it. Before you ask, no, I wasn't using drugs, I was sleeping normally, had never suffered a serious head injury, and wasn't under any unusual stress. I was sitting in one of my classes taking notes while the professor lectured, when suddenly, I realized that my entire existence, my identity had completely changed. I don't remember anything about my former life, but I know my reality shifted in that exact moment. It felt as if I had been transported into a different body, with a different personal history, a different family, and different friends. I was sitting in a different class, surrounded by different people, maybe even in an entirely different place. The wildest part was when I looked down at my notes, they had nothing to do with the class I was sitting in. My hand was mid-sentence, still writing, but everything I'd written before the transition was about business and marketing concepts, subjects I had never studied in any of my college courses. Meanwhile, the professor at the front of the room was clearly lecturing about public health. What really unsettled me was that the handwriting was unmistakably mine. I started looking around, completely thrown off, and I must have gasped out loud because the professor stopped talking and asked if I was okay. I quickly gathered my things, left the room, and went straight to the psychological counseling center. At that moment, I genuinely thought I'd had some kind of psychotic break or schizophrenic episode and needed help. There were 2 people in the office, probably in case they needed to sign me in for involuntary hospitalization. They triaged me and even considered admitting me for inpatient treatment because I was frantic, insisting that I didn't truly exist, that I wasn't real. After a long conversation, once I had calmed down, they told me I had likely experienced a severe dissociative episode, but none of them could explain the notes. I showed them, and they agreed it was strange, yet they tried to reason that I'd probably just forgotten about notes from another class and mixed things up. The problem was, I had never taken a business class. I actually had to look up some of the terms and formulas in the notes to even understand what they meant. Still, they weren't convinced. One of them even pulled out the DSM to show me how my symptoms fit dissociation. I ended up lying, told them I accepted that explanation, and spent a long time convincing them I was fine just so they wouldn't send me to the hospital. Maybe I did dissociate, but that doesn't explain the lasting change in my personality since then. I used to be a bubbly, outgoing person, and now I'm reserved and shy. Even writing this feels stressful because it makes me feel exposed. My interests and goals are completely different from what they were before that episode. I've dealt with some depression and anxiety throughout my life, but nothing that ever changed my perception of reality like this. The experience still baffles me. I try not to think about it too much because when I do, I spiral into questions about existence, alternate timelines, and whether my lifelong relationships are even real. Not that I've been able to maintain those relationships anyway. My family has almost completely disowned me, saying I changed and lost my values when I moved away for college. I can't relate to them at all. We struggle to communicate, and I don't feel love for anyone in my family. But I do love many other people, so I'm not some heartless psychopath. I haven't felt anything when family members have died, yet I've been devastated by the deaths and misfortunes of other loved ones, mostly people I met after that episode. This isn't a typical story of conservative parents rejecting a progressive child. My parents say I used to care about important things like marriage and having children, but I can't remember ever wanting to get married, and I've always been terrified by the thought of having kids. I don't enjoy family traditions. My tastes in food, entertainment, and style are completely different. Strangely, I am also the only one in my family who no longer speaks with a deep Southern accent. People noticed it after that episode. I've even watched old videos of myself as a kid, and my accent was clearly stronger and my voice higher. I think I may have consciously dropped the accent so people wouldn't assume I was dumb, but I'm not sure. It feels more like a hazy memory. Many memories from before that episode feel this way. In college, no one really noticed the change, but friends from my hometown definitely did. It's confusing, and it makes me feel like I can't be the same person my parents raised. Many of my friends who I supposedly grew up with have said I seem really different since I went away to college. I have definitely matured and developed, but their comments made me realize that I'm not the same person anymore. I can't relate to them at all, and I don't understand how we ever hung out, especially when it comes to humor. We don't laugh at the same things. I feel like I have to pretend to be someone else just to spend time with them, and because of that, our friendships have fizzled. They often want to gossip about people from our childhoods, but I feel no connection to those people. They're basically strangers to me, and I don't care about gossip. Even in college, I was a leader and founder of a sorority before that episode. Afterwards, I couldn't understand why I would ever pay to be part of an organization with such strict, old-school rules. I began to hate the events I once helped organize and attend, and the rituals felt completely meaningless. I went from proudly wearing my t-shirts and bags with the sorority's Greek letters every day to not even wanting to touch them because they felt like someone else's possessions. Eventually, I left the sisterhood. That decision surprised everyone except me. One troubling thing is that I don't really care about the relationships I've lost because of my personality change. I don't feel like I ever truly knew those people, so it doesn't matter to me if they dislike me or are surprised by my behavior. I've basically had to restart my life and make entirely new friends since then. Oddly, I've also reconnected with people from my past who say I'm nothing like they remember, yet we've gotten along really well. I can't explain why I wasn't closer to them before because now we share interests, values, communication styles, and more. My memories of things I supposedly enjoyed before are no longer appealing to me, and I don't understand how I ever did them. For example, I apparently skipped prom to go fishing because I didn't want to pay the entrance fee. But I love dressing up, I love dancing, and I don't like fishing at all, so that makes no sense. I also have tattoos whose significance I don't fully understand. They look nice, but I can't explain why I got them or even remember where the idea came from. When I see pictures of myself from before, I feel like I'm looking at a stranger. I dressed differently, stood differently, and even smiled differently. It's unsettling to me, though others don't seem to notice. There's something off about my eyes in those old photos, and it makes me uneasy. It's like the way I held my facial muscles while smiling was different back then. I can force my face to mimic that smile now, but it doesn't feel natural. Sometimes I still struggle with pictures because I don't feel like I'm the person in them. I really hate mirrors and often worry that my reflection, might try to take back control somehow. I'm honestly afraid to look into my reflection's eyes. One major fear I have is that one day I'll just switch back and have to go through all of this again, maybe even multiple times. Maybe I'll become an entirely different person once more. I really hope not. It's all incredibly strange, and I can't explain it. The whole thing unnerves me. Psychologists and psychiatrists seem uncomfortable whenever I mention it, so I've mostly stopped bringing it up, but I still think about it all the time. If you've made it this far, thank you for reading about my strange experience. Story 8. Maybe not the strangest in the same sense, but I had been thinking about a specific person a lot. I was hoping, wishing, for them to see me and understand how I felt, even though the haze of abuse they were in kept them from truly understanding my words. I kept realizing over and over that I had to leave, thinking maybe if I left, he would see how much I cared and come after me. But for months, every time I told myself to stop thinking about him, to move on, or to stop talking to him if we were in contact, it never worked. Without fail, I would immediately see him or his name somewhere. The strangest moment came when I was trying to calm my nerves before hanging out with someone new, a person I'd been talking to while trying to get over him. I had already found out that he and his new girlfriend were moving across the country, so I assumed he was long gone by then. I ran around the lake every single day, but that day it was unbearably hot and completely packed. I even had to wait in line just to park. When I finally did, I ended up in a spot where cars were constantly passing, so I had to sit and wait a bit before getting out. The timing of everything felt almost eerily perfect. The moment I finally stepped out of my car, I turned around to close the door, something I never normally do. I'd usually just swing it shut behind me. As I turned back around, the first and only thing I saw was this beautiful man sprinting past. I didn't have much time to process it, but I knew instantly that it was him. I had been so close to moving on, finally starting to get him out of my head, and then right at the last moment, there he was. I still went to hang out with the new person, but it went terribly. Seeing him had reminded me of my standards. The new guy just felt like a joke in comparison. I realized in that moment that I would rather be alone than be with anyone other than him. One thing that stood out about him was how he always congratulated me on my accomplishments, no matter how big or small. Growing up, my parents never showed much interest in what actually mattered to me or what I worked hard for, but somehow, he always seemed to know when recognition was deserved. After not seeing him for months, except for that brief moment at the lake, I spent what felt like endless months in complete anguish. I couldn't understand why his leaving affected me so deeply. I had to truly learn to feel and process my own emotions for the first time in my life. Around that same time, I had just started medication for ADHD, and for the first time, I could actually see and hear my feelings clearly, only for him to leave right when I was finally ready to share them. At the same time, I was dealing with the overwhelming stress of finishing my last semester of college, trying to find a job, all while COVID and quarantine restrictions were in full effect. The physical and mental toll was crushing. It didn't help that I had always used sharing my accomplishments with him as a way to motivate myself. Somehow, though, I managed. I don't know how, but I did it, knowing that the only person who would truly recognize how hard I had worked was myself. The very next day, just like that, I ran into him at the grocery store. It was a place I hadn't been to in years, but for some reason I happened to stop there while passing by. It was the day after I finished my last class. There have been so many moments like that, times when I thought he was finally leaving his abusive relationship, only to realize he wasn't. I even had to block him for a while just to protect my own peace. And yet, every time I did, I'd end up seeing him somewhere driving past me or appearing out of nowhere. One time recently, the weight of being his emotional support became too much. I decided I needed a break and went exactly 4 weeks without talking to him. I even set a reminder to mark it. And every single one of those weeks, I got some kind of reminder of him. My friend would mention him to our coworkers, telling stories about how he was a flat earther and refused to drink tap water because of the fluoride. That story caught on fast. Soon the whole office was obsessed with it and brought it up constantly. The funny part was when we showed them a picture of him. Every single one of my male coworkers, grown men, successful in their careers, married with families, living what you'd call the American dream, went weak in the knees for him. He is an MMA fighter, and when we mentioned it, they looked like little boys, completely awestruck and jealous of him. And rightly so, he is easily the most attractive person I have ever met. My female boss made us let her look at his picture a little longer so she could admire a hot man, and she became pregnant around that time. I wouldn't even blame her. Just looking at him makes me feel the same way. Those comments were only from week 1. In week 2, I took a detour to work because my usual exit was under construction. On this long side road, I passed a parked construction truck from a company that only had this person's first name. It felt completely out of place. There was no obvious construction. I had never seen that company before, and I never saw it again. Later, I came across an article in the Business Journal about the restaurant where we used to work, closing down. The author of the article shared his name. Then finally, week 4. By this point, my flat earther boyfriend had become the running joke in the office. One random coworker, the only one who had stepped in when I tried to defend his strange beliefs, kept asking me questions. This coworker had seen me get cut down over and over because how could you actually date someone who thinks that is a difficult question to answer, especially when the list of beliefs is pages long and I had only just met these people. Once we showed them his picture, though, they eased up, admitting he was hot enough to get away with it. I had mostly forgotten about it, but one coworker would constantly ask if I had any flat earth updates. He sat right by my friend, the same one who had first told me to block him and stop talking to him. So I always replied, "No, not yet." Finally, in week 4, he asked again, and my friend said, "You know what? I think it's time." I jokingly told her that when we get married, this coworker will have to officiate the wedding. Little did anyone know, I had actually broken down and texted him just a few days before. The night before, I'd felt an overwhelming urge to tell him I missed him, and I did. The moment I sent it, it felt like the universe was aligning in my favor. The part I can't explain is that everything points to this person clearly being my soulmate. It's the only thing that makes sense. These signs gave me the courage to share my feelings with him, and I finally saw him again just a few days ago. He was still with this abusive, horrible, nasty girl, someone who literally will never be good enough for him and probably never has been. Now, I don't know what to think. I can't figure out how to make sense of all those signs leading up to this moment. Maybe I just need to accept them as coincidences and move on, but for some reason that feels wrong. I don't know. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.